In the Bible, there is this ancient worship of the god called Baal. But that's all ancient history. That's all done. Or is it? Something surfaced not too long ago in Europe. It was the worship of Baal, but under a different name. It's all connected to the G20. It's all connected to the opening of the Gotthard Tunnel in Europe. How can this be? How can this ancient worship of the devil still be around, and why are we not recognizing it? Pastor Carl Gallups, we are very happy to have you again here today.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure for you.
God bless you. Thanks for having me.
Can you help us clear all of this up? What is going on with Baal in Europe?
Yeah, thanks. Well, yeah, it's an amazing phenomena that has happened again right before the eyes of the world. I mean, everything's now hiding in plain sight. You know, we're living in the days, we're the first generation to live in the days of uber technology, a lot of it written about in the Bible. We were talking about that earlier, thousands of years ago, hinting towards those things that the whole world's seeing at once and things like that. So we're living in those days now. And so much, we're pummeled with so much information that I think a lot of people just kind of, you know, they just miss it. They say, oh, that's weird. And then they go on to the next thing. You say, wait, take a look at this. So you're right. Baal, as you would say it in Hebrew, as most people say it in America, Baal. Basically, Baal has made a victory tour. And what I believe is the preparation for the setting up of the time of the Antichrist. And I don't set dates. I don't know when that's going to be. I try not to over-sensationalize what is there. So much of what's there is sensational, as you'll soon find out as we talk about this. But I just call it like it is. I know what the Scriptures say. There's going to be a generation to see. It's going to get more and more of an Antichrist spirit, more and more demonic, coming to an apex of the Antichrist himself. So in the meantime, we know that's all fueled by Satan, because he knows his time short, Revelation 12. He's furious, and he knows it's coming down to that point, and he so desperately wants to take the throne of God. So let me start here. Let me go back to the Old Testament very quickly and say what most of your audience already knows, but just for your newer viewers especially, and newer people in the Word. B-A-A-L, guttural stop in the Hebrew, Baal. We call it Baal in America. But this worship of Baal or Baal is ancient, one of the most ancient gods that we run into in the Old Testament that continually plagued the nation of Israel, in that the people were so prone to it, so drawn to it, so seduced by the Spirit. Now that word Baal, as you and your audience knows, Hebrew word, which literally and only means boss, or Lord, little l. It was also kind of a nickish name in the Hebrew for a husband, because under that culture, you know, kind of the master of the family, the Lord, little l of the family, the boss of the family. So Baal, and that's what it meant, a husband, a boss, Lord, little l, master. Okay, but it just like words in the English language change.
Yes.
You know, the word gay used to mean happy. Now it's something totally different. And so Baal was like that. It went through this transformation over time to mean more than just at the human level of a master or Lord or boss, or even the idea of a husband, but it went into the spiritual realm. And it became a name that I'm convinced was fueled by Satan himself to describe the worship of the Baals, the Baals, the gods, little g with an S, you know, which comes from the Hebrew word Elohim. And so speaking of the fallen ones, particularly from the divine realm. So what happens, that kind of transforms then over the years into this elaborate system of worship. It's what we would call pagan, what we would call demonic, that truly those that are worshiping the Baals or Baal or Baal himself, it's Satan. I mean, anything that draws people away from Yahweh, okay? And the whole context of the worship of the Baals was truly freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from Yahweh. Freedom from the Ten Commandments. Freedom from the personal relationship, freedom from righteousness. You know, just let your flesh go, let your mind go. And so the whole Baal worship in the ancient days was centered around, and this has been thoroughly historically researched, and I've got it documented in a lot of my writings, but it's centered around drug and alcohol abuse to alter your state of mind and spirit. It's centered around sexual filth and promiscuity and licentiousness. It was also involved was the offering of children to sacrificial flames for the purpose of gaining economic advantage. In other words, Baal promised that if you would bring so many children to each of these gatherings to be sacrificed, that those that brought them would reap all kind of financial rewards in their life and in their businesses and over their homes. I mean, this is all, again, historically verified. So that's where this whole mess begins in the Old Testament. You move into the New Testament and you discover the term Baal a few times, but it's most often called Baal-zebub, or Beelzebub, we say in English. And that translates to Lord of the Flies, literally. But dynamic equivalent, it means basically Lord of Death, Lord of Filth. In fact, we have ancient historical writings where the ancient rabbis of Jesus' time, they would often refer to Beelzebub as the Lord of Filth, because wherever filth is, flies gather, right? So the Lord of the Flies, Lord of Filth, Lord of Death. Okay, so Jesus, and I'm saying this, I'm building to this because we're going to talk about what's happened in our lifetime just in the last year and a half. But Jesus himself in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Luke, he literally identifies that Beelzebub is Satan. And the gods around him, the demonic horde, the worship of Beelzebub is the worship of Satan and the demonic realm. Jesus says that. So now that we've settled the history of it, the foundation of it, and who this is and what this is, and it's not just some little pagan mind game. This is as deep and as real as it gets. This is the worship of Satan by name, you're calling him Lord, Master, Boss, okay, Baal, okay, or even husband in that sense, and even the perverted sense of what could go with that. That's what you're doing, all right? Now, here's what comes right out of the headline news that so many people missed, and again, it's hiding in plain sight. When I first start describing it, your audience might think, well, there's really nothing to that. But then listen to exactly what happened and how it happened. So, Arab Spring, we've spoken of that before. It breaks out and all of this collapse starts happening. Civil war in Syria is just horrific. One of the things that happened in Syria was when ISIS was really thick and heavy and really heavy-handed in that area and controlling of that area, they were destroying as many ancient artifacts as they could that they felt was completely opposed to their Islamic worldview. So one of the things that they destroyed was a temple of Baal built by the Romans during the Roman Empire, which was still there, and the archway that represented the gateway going into the temple. Now, they destroyed it. It used to be a huge tourist attraction. You know, like you can go to Israel today and there's stuff from 2,000 years ago. And people come and they see it. Well, Syria and other parts of the Middle East, Turkey is a big tourist area, the Mediterranean. Syria had some tourist attractions. That was one of them, the ancient Temple of Baal built by the Romans. Well, ISIS came in, started destroying everything they could get their hands on. Christian, pagan, didn't matter, anything. That was one of the things they destroyed. This was in Palmyra, Syria, okay? Now, the archway, they left for a while, but then eventually they destroyed that too. So what happened is this group of people, and I can't remember the name of the group, but again, this was carried in mainstream media because it was announced they were going to first bring it to New York City. But this group of people, kind of under the guise of archaeology and historical preservation, and I say under the guise, I think some of them were very sincere about that. In other words, they were just infuriated by these ancient relics of tourist attraction and ancient history that were just summarily destroyed, okay? And so they wanted to try to recreate them. Well, recreating the whole Temple of Baal was a little too big of a project, but they did recreate what's called the Palmyra Arch, or the archway, the Baal archway. Now, what that represents, by the way, the replication is 11 tons and it's 5 stories tall.
Wow.
So I mean,
Didn't realize it was
So it's
that big.
big.
yeah, and it's to scale. Yeah, it's not just some little 8-foot arch that you walk through. No, this is a huge dedication to Baal worship. And the way the thing was originally structured is that this archway represented literally a portal entering from one dimension to the next. Now, I know people say, well, that sounds like science fiction. Well, actually, there's, if you study of quantum mechanics and all of that, I mean, we understand that there are multiple dimensions of reality. The Word of God speaks of that as well. But the Baal worship, Satan literally put it upon the hearts and minds of the worshipers to build this arch. So you had, before you could approach the temple, you had to go through there, and you were representing, I'm now sanctifying myself, I'm coming into the presence of Baal. You know, it's everything God does, Satan perverts and copycats and mimics and counterfeits.
Always.
So the temple, on the Temple Mount, you know, there was the outer courts, and then the inner sanctuary, then the Holy of Holies, and the priest had to prepare themselves as they came, and then only one priest could go into the Holy of Holies. Well, see, Satan kind of replicates all of that. So he's got the archway where you have to come through that first, and then you go in. All right, so what they did was they rebuilt and replicated the arch. Then in 2016, it was announced, it was in early 2016, I think January, February, something like that. New York Times headline article, other world publications, national publications, Washington Post, the Temple of Baal is coming to Times Square. That was the headline, something very close to that. I'm paraphrasing, but that literally was the Temple of Baal will be erected in Times Square. Well, that headline, you know, really infuriated a lot of people. There was an outcry. I mean, the whole evangelical Christian community said, what? And then even people in New York City, even if they weren't believers or, you know, Bible-believing Christians, they were kind of freaked out by that. So there was such an outcry that they backed off and said, no, well, we'll do something else. We won't do that. But so what happened was they changed the wording, because it really wasn't the Temple of Baal, but it was the archway that represented coming into the presence of Baal. So what they did, just a few months later, they opened with this production in London, okay? Now, their headline was, we want to take this on a world tour to show the world this relic that we've had to recreate to show you what, you know, nasty ISIS did. And then their theme was, because this represents freedom. Well, if you go back into the ancient historical writings of the worship of Baal, that's right. That's exactly what it represents. So again, hiding in plain sight. This represents freedom. And then they said it represents victory. And then they said this will show that ISIS can never win. Well, an arch to Baal is representative that ISIS cannot win? That didn't even make sense.
No.
But what they did was, they couldn't get it into New York City. And by the way, it wasn't the Temple of Baal, but that's what the headline said, and that's what everybody reacted to. It was this archway. So they opened it in London, the #1 economic capital of the European Union then, before Brexit started, and also #1 or #2 economic capital of the world. New York City and London are constantly back and forth on that. And so they opened it there. And again, your audience is probably thinking, well, what's the big deal? It's just a little historical artifact. And London, of course, one of the great major cities of the world. Why not? Okay. But here's where the thing gets creepy. They opened it. They aligned the opening and the unveiling of it to correspond with Beltane, B-E-L-T-A-N-E. Your viewers can look all of that up, and that literally translates to the fires of Baal. And it is an internationally recognized celebration of Baal. It's their holiday. It's
like a Halloween.
It's like a Halloween, if you will.
Okay.
And so, in the fires of Baal, Beltane, that's what the celebration is called. That goes back to the fires of infant sacrifice in the Old Testament. Beltane, that's what it means. So they unveiled this thing in honor. Now you say, well, maybe they didn't know what they were doing, but just watch. But they unveiled this thing in honor of Baal and the fires of Baal on the day of Beltane in London, the economic capital of the world and of the European Union, and we know how all those might tie into prophecy. And so here it is. There's the first unveiling. They tried to do it in New York City first. Well, what's in New York City? Well, the United Nations, ground zero, you know, another economic capital of the world. If not number one, it's number two. I mean, right there with London. So they opened it in London. They kind of stilled the waters back in America. Then they redid the headline, and they said, the Palmyra Arch. They didn't even put the word Baal in it. The Palmyra Arch, the historical artifact, will be on display in New York City. And everybody went, oh, that's cool. You see?
It's like bringing a Ramesses from ancient Egypt display through and coming through the, you know, through the museums and all that.
That's right. So, but then what they did, they took the same thing that everybody reacted, they bring it to New York City, home of the United Nations. Now, I'm emphasizing this because it's going to go a couple of other places too on this world tour. In every place, I'll go ahead and give it away, every place they take it is a globalist economic financial power center, which is what Baal worship is all about, power and wealth and freedom. And that's what they're declaring. So they move it from London. Then some weeks later, a month and a half later, they take it to New York. Now it's not called the Temple of Baal. It's not even called the Arch of Baal. It's called the Palmyra Arch. Oh, and it's a historical display, but they display it now in a park right across from City Hall in New York, which is just a block or two away from Ground Zero and not too far from the United Nations. So it's right there. And the mayor comes out, makes a big speech about how this represents freedom. And they never say, freedom from what? What are you talking about? But again, the historical understanding of the worship of Baal, that was the theme. Freedom from Yahweh, freedom from the Lord, freedom from His regulations, freedom from His law, freedom from His word. All right, so they unveil it in New York. Well, by the time it gets to New York and people like us are watching this, and I was not the only one to see this, I was one that was outspoken early on, but there were many others too. They first saw it in London, opened on Beltane, and they said, that's pushing just a little. I mean, if it's just going to be a historical display, you just want to display, like you said, Ramses and all that, that's fine. But you purposely time it for Beltane, then you bring it to New York, this economic engine, the center of world power, the United Nations, this economic engine of the United States, the #1 superpower. You put it just a few blocks from Ground Zero. You put it right in front of City Hall. I mean, now it's a little more in your face. The next place they took it was to Dubai.
That makes sense.
They took it to Dubai, and they coordinated it with the opening of the World Governance Summit. 4,000 people from 130 nations of the world, world leaders were there. Big name people, Elon Musk, speaker, and a bunch of globalists. They were all the speakers. Barack Obama was there. Barack Obama was a part of helping to get the World Governance Council started. One of their themes in the headline news was one of the spokespeople for it said, well, what we're trying to do is to bring all the nations of the world together under one umbrella. And I'm going to put quotes because that's a quote. I'm quoting. That's what this is about. Bringing all the nations of the world together under one umbrella. Well,
that's scary.
Well, that's the Antichrist spirit. That's the globalist spirit. Okay, so now follow the trail because it goes one more place. London on Beltane, New York, United Nations, Ground Zero, world's most powerful superpower nation, economy, money, power, everything that goes with it. Dubai, the gateway between Africa, Asia, in Europe, the financial center of that whole area. What's happening there? The World Governance Council. How did the World Governance Council open? With the unveiling of the Arch of Baal. It was all a part of the ceremony. So that happens now. People like me and others, now we're watching, then I'm starting to write about it. And other people writing about it saying, this is in your face. Mm-hmm. This is in your face. It's like Satan's taking a victory march of the power centers of the world. He said, it's kind of, you know how we do as kids, put a basket full of rolls on the table and there's 100 people around the table and we go, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. We touch all the rolls because nobody else will want to touch it if we touch it. That little children's game we play. That's how I compared this. It's like Satan saying, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. London's mine, New York's mine, Dubai's mine, World Governance Council, the United Nations, Beltane, the power, the money, the control. These are mine, head of the UN, European Union, you know, the most influential nation of the world, Dubai, the New York of Middle East, if you will. Then, a few months later, it goes to Florence, Italy, at the opening of the G7 conference. Another kind of United Nations, many people believe a globalist-minded institution. And they opened the G7 conference with the ceremony to the arch. So, you know, I know people listening to this can say, well, maybe you're just reading too much into it. Maybe I am, but I don't think so. Because I know what the scriptures say about the last days. And the scriptures don't use these words, but this is what it says. The hiding in plain sight of the demonic yes. outpouring. There will be, Paul says, the Spirit clearly says in the last days that there will be a demonic, and he doesn't use the word outpouring, but that's what it means, that will lead to apostasy and will also lead to seducing spirits that will just kind of sweep and capture the world, will seduce the world. And that's where we are, guys. And so this was a hiding in plain sight. I said Baal takes a victory tour is what I wrote about and talked about. And he's just saying, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. And those four places kind of represent, you know, the power control structures of the world. And it was all done under the guise of, well, we're just presenting a historical artifact. Yeah, but why in those places? And why does there have to be a ceremony attached to the opening of globalist agenda things? Why did it have to be on Beltane, the celebrating of killing your children in the fire?
Well, and this goes back to the whole concept that, you know, we write off so many things as coincidence.
Yes.
Like this could have very well gone, well, this is just a coincidence. And that's why we don't pay attention to prophecy. And that's why we don't see the unraveling of prophecy happening in today's day and age.
It's hiding in plain sight.
That's right.
It's right before our eyes, and so we dismiss it.
That's right.
And today, when we're just pummeled with information, 24/7. And by the way, there's some good to that. I mean, I love the internet. I love the technology. We're using it now.
Yes.
And I use it every day of my life for the gospel and for good stuff. I hope anyway. I'm trying to, you know, and that's what I ask the Lord to use it for. And so there's good stuff. But at the same time, we've eaten of the tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. And everything that's good, Satan is there to pervert it, to twist it, to counterfeit it, to use it for his. And it becomes evil. It becomes black and filthy and dark. We know and I'm not going to just give the litany of filth that's on the internet right here on this show, but we know what all the litany of filth is on the internet. Not only is it out there, but what I tell people is this has now given the demonic a platform that they've never had before through technology. And I think a lot of that technological information may be even coming from the demonic realm into the mind seducing. Our spirits are being seduced. Here, eat of this piece of fruit, eat of this tree, eat of this tree. Look what you can create. You can create this. Look how you can use this. Now you can do this. Now you can know this. It's like a new Tower of Babel. Now everybody can speak the same language. We don't have to worry about boundaries and borders and languages anymore because we've got this new tower that reaches to the heavens. You know, I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing happening right now. We're the first generation in the history of the planet, not only to see these things happen, but to have the technology. Do you know how impossible it would have been just 100 years ago to rebuild and reconstruct the Palmyra Arch, 11 tons, 5 stories, then assemble it and disassemble it and take it all over the world from London to New York to Dubai to Florence, Italy? I mean, just 100 years ago, it would have been almost impossible. Prior to that, it would have been impossible. But we can now do it all, and we can do it within weeks. We just move it all around.
And we can all see it happening.
And we can see it, and instantly we can watch it. We can all participate if we desire to in the ceremonies and the unfolding and the process. We can all go around and say, this represents freedom. Freedom from what?
Well, that reminds me of something very interesting. My family's a sports family. Yeah. And what you say about happy ceremonies and the world coming together. How many people have said, look at the Olympics opening ceremonies and watch it carefully? And people go, oh, that's nothing. You're just making it all up. That's all coincidence. Well, is it? Or is it the same thing where all these powers are coming together? Let's hide in plain sight and suddenly show the world what we really want them to believe in.
Yeah. How about the halftime shows at Super Bowls? A lot of those have been
kind of bizarre
documented,
too, haven't they?
have to be bizarre, and even some of them very occultic in nature, depending upon who the entertainer is that's the chief. Because a lot of entertainers in Hollywood literally, and I've got these guys quoted in some of my writings and resource from their own mouths, their own quotes about how they channel the spirits and for their own, creativity, and that they connect, and they don't use the word "we worship Satan," but that's what they're describing.
Mm-hmm.
And not every star does that, but some of the mega stars do. They have written about it, they have spoken about it, they have done interviews on it, and so we know that whole mindset is thick in the entertainment industry. We know that. So now, can I relate the Goddard Tunnel to all of this? Do we have time? Or?
We do. I think maybe we should, let's save that for the second half.
Okay,
Absolutely.
because that kind of ties right into this whole thing. Another thing that happened right in front of our face that was really even more out in your face than the Baal tour was.
Well, and we forget as believers that, again, at the core of it, it's good versus evil, it's God versus Satan, and we get stuck in our everyday lives. And so when we see things like this, we don't even consider digging deeper or looking further. But like you said, Satan has a plan, and he's frustrated, he's angry, he's furious. I mean, he wants the world to be his. I mean, that's his end goal.
Yes, and it's headed that way. And for those that have eyes to see, we can see it.
What other examples can we give? We mentioned just before the break about the Goddard Tunnel. What's that about?
Yeah. I like the way you say "in your face," because that's I want to reemphasize, we're the first generation to see the in-your-face outpouring. Listen, there's always been demonic outpouring. I mean, go all the way back to all the torture, mayhem, wars, the brutality, the slavery, the sexual perversion that goes all the way back through history. And that's demonic outpouring. But today, we're the first generation to have in-your-face, 24/7, internet, cell phones, media, entertainment industry. I mean, children carry devices around in their pockets that they can access 24/7. So the demonic have a platform now to pummel the world with these seducing spirits. Does that make sense? So you ask now about another example, because we were just talking about the Baal tour and the Baal worship, and Baal meaning Satan. That's what Jesus said. It means Lord, Master, other than Yahweh. That's Satan. Well, interestingly, there are several passages of Scripture in the Old Testament that speak of worshiping the goat demons. That word is actually used, the goat demons. And when I came across those some years back, I said, now that's something. I've read the Bible through so many times. I don't know that I've ever remember seeing about goat demons. What's a goat demon? Well, I did a lot of research, and basically that's where this whole Baphomet thing came from, a half goat, half man imagery that came into the minds of the ancients, and they built statues and altars to worship the goat demons. And apparently, you see, we laugh at that sometimes, say, oh, that bunch of pagan ignoramuses. Well, no, those were pretty smart people and cultures. I mean, they built things, they engineered things. They were not
a lot of things that we can't replicate today.
Exactly, is what I'm saying. So why would they spend so much time and energy and effort in their life on building these altars and these images and then gathering for rituals and ceremonies? Because it worked. The demonic realm would infest and inhabit that location. It was like why did God build the temple? He says, here's where you come to meet with me. Here's where I will come and meet with you.
And that worked.
And that worked. Satan replicates. See, we got to get it out of our mind that demon worship and pagan altars and all of that. Well, that's just superstition. Really, why are the first two commandments about that? Thou shalt have no other gods, little g, s, before you. Comes from the word Elohim. You'll have no other Elohim before you. God calls himself the ultimate Elohim, capital E.
Yes.
But other Elohim from the divine realm that are fallen. You shall have no other gods, and you will not build any graven images. And I'm going to use the word altar because that's also what it means. The first two commandments are about this very thing that has been the temptation of the world ever since the fall in the garden. Okay? So I'm reading about the goat demons, and I see that not only did they have it before nation of Israel was a nation, but some of the kings of Israel under the divided nation, they reinstituted goat demon worship. And what was one of the central things? They would sacrifice their children to the fires. And they would have all kind of sexual perversion and all. I mean, it's Baal worship in another form. Now it's half man, half goat, okay? And it's Satan. It's the demonic realm. So they build an altar, they build the statue, they gather around it, they start chanting, they start worshiping, and the demonic shows up. And there is power that's exhibited. There's changing of personalities and spirits, and people say, oh, this is real. We've tapped into the power. Yes, you have. You've tapped into the dark side. You have. Now, that's the history of it. Now let's go right into our headlines. Hiding in plain sight, right in front of our face. I mentioned the Goddard Tunnel. G-O-T-T-H-A-R-D, I think is how it's spelled. Switzerland. This happened in 2016. Maybe 2017. It's very recently. But here's what happened. The Goddard Tunnel is a railway tunnel, an underground, through the mountains and underground deep railway tunnel in Switzerland. It's the deepest and the longest such railway tunnel in the world. It's 35.6 miles long. I don't know that I would go on a train underground for 35 miles, but anyway, there it is. It's the Goddard Tunnel. All right, it's this great achievement of man, this technological engineering achievement, so they're going to celebrate it. I kid you not, there are videos of this. So what I'm going to say, if your audience doesn't know this, again, it's going to be so sensational. And again, I tell you, I don't over-sensationalize anything. I just bring stuff that people have never heard before, but it's right there. They can go back and research it, and it's in mainstream media because it was reported gleefully. Here's what happened. The opening of the Goddard Tunnel, the ceremony, they set up this big stage. I think it was near the entrance of it on one side of it. They invited powerful industry and government leaders from around the European Union especially. I think they invited other dignitaries of the world, but those were the main ones they were focusing on. They set up bleachers and they put up a big stage to have this opening ceremony. And they were, thousands of people there. And they had a dignitary area with the big, red sashes and ribbons and all that. So for the dignitaries, the world leaders to sit. So out comes this parade. It looks like a Macy's Day parade or something. I mean, and out come all of these figures. They've got people suspended from cables like they're flying through the air. And you start looking at all of this, and again, all this is on video. So you can see it. You can see it on YouTube. A lot of the news articles that wrote about it back then, 2016, 2017, they embedded some of the videos in their articles. And most of them didn't see or say what we're getting ready to see or say. They were celebrating it. But you have this parade, and before long you're looking and you're saying, this is weird. This is almost like going to a halftime show at Super Bowl and say, there's some occultic stuff in here. Well, this was in your face because you began to realize that these people were dressed in such a way that they were supposed to be representing, it looked like otherworldly beings, demons, angels, whatever, from the dimension. Yeah, oh yeah, that's how they were dressed. And again, some were suspended and kind of flying, and others were walking. It was all choreographed. They were doing a dance, and then the drums were pounding and the music playing, and then the next thing that is presented is it's a live person, but dressed up as the goat man.
Oh my goodness.
Who comes out. He's sitting upon a throne, and then they start simulating homosexual sex acts in front of him as worship. This is at the opening of a railway tunnel, the Goddard Tunnel.
Who would have thought of this?
I'm telling you, and people are up there cheering and clapping, and the leaders of the world are watching it.
Well, it's dance art. It's theater.
Yes,
right?
that's exactly. It's like the Palmyra Arch. It's history. It's archaeology. Okay, that's right. But where did you take it, and when did you open it? Beltane, really? And all of these governance centers and globalist centers? What are you saying? We know what Baal worship is. We know what you're saying. Again, we know what goat demons are. We know what Baphomet is, the most recognizable satanic image in the world.
With the horns.
Yes, the goat man. As a matter of fact, you might remember, I think it was Oklahoma and Arkansas, they were being sued by the atheist groups about the Ten Commandments and everything.
Yes.
And then they said, well, we want to put our own, if you're going to keep that up, we want to put our own monument to go beside it. It's only fair. And so there were lawsuits, and finally the government's acquiesced and said, okay, what do you want to put there? Baphomet, the goat man.
See, I didn't hear that either.
Oh, yeah. Again, your audience can get on the internet. You check this out, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Baphomet, Goat Man, Ten Commandments. And again, I've written to this a lot, and I've got it all resourced, so I know what I'm talking about. I want to assure your audience, but they can check this out, and it's worse than that. It shows the Goat Man sitting on a throne. It's in stone. That's their monument. He's got a scepter. Only thing he has is a loincloth. So he's nude except for a loincloth. And on one side is a little girl, and on the other side is a little boy. And they're bowed before him, and they're looking up at him adoringly. So there's even a spirit of pedophilia there as well.
No.
That was what they wanted to put on the cross. And then the legislature said, you know what? No, we're taking the Ten Commandments down. You can't do that. We're not putting anything up there. I mean, because it was so vile. That was what they wanted to put. You know, the goat demon, all the way back to the Old Testament, that God said, don't you ever put one of those up, or I will bring my wrath upon you. And some of the kings of Israel did, and God brought his wrath.
Well, it's more common than people think. I mean, that whole goat demon head, you think of the upside down pentagram.
Yep.
That's what it traces, his head.
That's Baphomet. Yep.
But Pastor Carl,
Yes.
it's all a coincidence, isn't it? I
Yes,
mean,
it's just a coincidence.
I mean,
It
it's
doesn't
not
mean
real.
anything. And please hear me. Listen, I come from a law enforcement background. Sometimes people say, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. I said, well, wait a minute. It depends on how you define conspiracy theorist. First of all, I did criminal investigations for a while. So yeah, almost all crimes begin with a conspiracy. And what a good investigator does is I develop a theory about a conspiracy. And I try to prove it wrong. You know, in other words, if you were accused of a conspiracy to murder, and so one of the things that I would do as an investigator, one technique I would use, is to try to prove that you couldn't have done it. Because if I can do that, if I, who I'm investigating the murder, can clear you with alibis and DNA and all that, then I know that I need to move on to somebody else. It's not the opposite that you see in the movies, like, okay, I'm focusing on you, I'm going to prove you did it. Well, that's one way to do it, but you can get in trouble, because I can kind of, in my mind, make it that you've done it and kind of force the evidence that way. But so yes, I kind of am a conspiracy theorist, but not one of those wild-eyed crazy ones. I just know what the Word of God says. I see the Goddard Tunnel demonstration. I see the Baal Victory Tour. I connect the dots, and then I say, I could be wrong about this, but what do you think? There it is. Here's what the Word of God says. Here's what they're doing. Here's what they're saying. Here's what they're celebrating. I don't think this is a coincidence. I think this ties into the last day scriptures about Satan is furious. He knows his time is short. The Spirit clearly says in the last days there's going to be a demonic outpouring. Book of Revelation talks about the seducing spirit seducing the kings of the world, going to those thrones of power to seduce them. I mean, it's all right there in the scriptures. And now we're the first generation in the history of the planet to have the platform of technology that it can be just pumped before our eyes continually. And it's almost like an intoxicating beverage where you know, the first 2 or 3 or 4 sips or the first glass or two, you know, sweet to the taste and everything, but before long we're just so intoxicated by it that we think everything's lovely. We're desensitized.
That's right. That's
That's
exactly
what's happening. So I know you were sarcastically asking, isn't this coincidence? But that's how Satan does it. And, you know, the old cliche of boiling the frog slowly, intoxicating, seducing, desensitizing. Yeah, that's what's happening. So yes, I am a conspiracy theorist. I do see these things and connect the dots. But again, I try not to over-sensationalize. I just take what it is and try to wake the church up to what the times we're living in.
We have to be aware. We have to be conscious of what is happening throughout the world. And, things like this would have never been tolerated in the Old Testament. If we're really getting down to it, God would have stopped it right away.
Or there would be a stoning before anything.
And if you consider it, I mean, look how long it took for them to build the altar of the calf when Moses was up in the mountain. I mean, it didn't take long. It didn't take years.
Right.
I don't even think that he was gone for months.
He's gone for 40 days.
Right.
40 days.
Right. Right.
Really? And then they had already turned their back on God and built another altar.
Right.
When they had all the supplies that they needed, all of the goods that kept them alive.
Right.
Now, speaking of conspiracy,
Yeah.
deep state.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Well, we only have a few minutes for deep state, but we want to know. So this is all part of a grander plan. It's not necessarily just the worship of Satan. I mean, truly it is at the core of it. But explain deep state to us.
Thank you. Yeah, the deep state, of course, for decades and decades and decades, there have been people writing through sometimes fictional novels. I think of Larry Burkett's book, The Illuminati, that was written and people read that and they said, oh my gosh, this is a fictional novel, but yeah, this kind of stuff is happening. So you have like Illuminati, Bohemian Grove, world leaders, power structures, power groups, meetings, networking, fraternal organizations, if you will, of networking. And you got to remember, a lot of this stuff kind of was birthed long before there was anything like the internet. I mean, that was how the power people networked, were through these organizations. Okay, so what has happened, I'm convinced, in the geopolitical physical realm, we are watching, it's now being uncovered. By the way, I've told you before, I don't claim to be a prophet, but one thing I said a couple of years ago, I said it on some major television shows. They said, well, what do you think the next couple of years are going to hold? And I said, I think there's going to be a great unveiling. The Lord has put it on my heart that things are going to be exposed like never before. I didn't have a clue what I was talking about. That was just on my heart. Now look what's happening. I mean, the covers of it, it's like the Wizard of Oz looking behind the curtain and the little dogs pulling the curtain back. One of the things we've uncovered and exposed, fake media, deep state, the connection. And the connection to all of that, to power structures and power leaders, even into the three-letter agencies now, we're finding out.
Yes.
FBI, CIA, DHS, NSA. I mean, we're finding all this stuff out. It's being exposed, it's being unveiled. So this stuff's been going on since the most ancient of days. These conspiracies and intrigues and palace intrigues and attempted coups that's been going on since the nation of Israel and before in the Egyptian empire. But now we've moved in, to our modern age and the United States of America and a constitution and the rule of law, and we're immune to that. No. Now we're finding out what many people have feared for many, many decades, is that in addition to what we see of the government, the three tiers of government, and we elect a president and our congressmen and all that, and the judges, and we're moving along. In the meantime, we get up, we pay the bills, we mow the grass, we go to work, we say, and everybody's happy, and we watch the football game, and we watch our TV shows, and everybody's being entertained by the the entertainers, Roman Empire.
Hey.
Because see, while they kept them entertained with the gladiators, while the people were congregated cheering at the the gladiator games, the intrigue was good. The deep state was operating back here. The facade before the Roman people was, you've got your Senate and you've got but the deep state was, you had emperors and senators cutting deals, and they were selling out the Roman Empire to the highest bidder continually. And the thing they got in return was a promise to keep their land, to get more land and more power and more prestige. They didn't care who ruled Rome, as long as they were a part of it, the deep state. All right, it's happening in America. It's been happening in America. We feared that would happen. Our early founding fathers told us, we've given you a constitutional republic if you can keep it. But to keep a constitutional republic requires men and women that are serving in government that have nobody's perfect and nobody's sinless, but that have a decent heart, who value rule of law and freedom and value what we have. The problem with that, though, is that's a demonic nesting place and a breeding ground, because where you have that kind of freedom, you also have the ability for Satan and the seducing spirits. So what has happened is this deep state, it's nothing less than an attempted soft coup of America. I say soft because they don't want to go up to the White House with military and take out Congress, and because they know the 350 million of us and half of us have guns. I mean, we'd go out of our minds. But it's got to appear to those of us that are mowing the grass and paying the bills and going to the ball games. It's got to appear to us that everything that's happening is just happening. Well, the court ruled, Supreme Court said, well, Congress said, well, the president signed an executive order and all that's constitutional, and it's all, and the FBI investigated and they didn't find anything wrong, and the CIA says, no, there's nothing to it. So it's got to be, you see how that works?
It's like a million little baby steps.
That's right. And the media, the New York Times reported, and the Washington Times reported, and CNN said, that's the deep state. When all of those things, and it's taken them decades to do this, when the leftists, the extreme leftists, the extreme liberals, I'm not going to get into Democrats and Republicans and independents because there's evil and good in all of those people. Yes. But I'm saying this mindset, this demonic mindset, it's born in Satan's mind. I'm convinced he knows that America has to come down. Now, that doesn't mean we have to burn up in flames and go away, but it means the America we envision, Constitution, rule of law, law and order, Judeo-Christian foundation, declaration, that has to go away, at least in the minds of people, in order for the one world order, the satanic, demonic, Antichrist spirit. Because right now we're kind of standing in the way of that with our uber power, our hyper power. We're not a superpower, we're a hyper power. It would take the next 2 or 3 superpowers combined to even come close to what we have. Our economic engine, who we are as a nation, the influence we have in the world, the Judeo-Christian foundation. And we can, if we think back over the last 100 years, we've seen this slow erosion. Outlaw this, outlaw that, outlaw this, outlaw. Tell our children, generation after generation, there is no God. You come from monkeys. I mean, everything they can do to bring this down. Now we're finally in the age of internet, instantaneous information. Now we have an administration that not only is exposing deep state, but he was a victim of it, apparently. And so now he's really infuriated, and the people around him, so they're like the little dog that belonged to Dorothy, pulling back the curtains and saying, look, that's the pushing the buttons and pulling the levers. That's what's happening. It's deep state. Now, behind all of that, I say there's an even deeper state, and I'm borrowing the title of Colonel Robert McGinnis' book, The Deeper State. He's a good friend of mine, and I've talked to you about this before. He's a great guy. He works in the Pentagon, but he's also a very godly Christian man. And he speaks of, yeah, there's the deep state, and he's aware of it. He calls it out as much as he can. He says, but it's really about the deeper state, and that's what we've been talking about. It is, we see it in the political realm, we see it in the media, we see it in the entertainment industry, we see it sometimes in the halls of Congress, we see it in the government, we see it in the courts, we see it in the 3-letter agencies. Now we're seeing more and more and more of it. We get it. Larry Burkett was right. Those guys were right. But what we need to understand is it's even deeper than that. It goes right to the mind of Satan himself, and the Word of God told us these things were going to happen.
And out of that, the Antichrist will be born. And
I
the
think
new world
so.
government.
Yeah.
And prophecy will be fulfilled.
I don't see how it can't fit together like that.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. These are the times we're living in. Very prophetic times.
It is. So we have a few minutes left.
Okay.
What would be your message? We've done a series of these shows now with you. What do you want people to take away? What do you want them to know or get out of these shows from you?
Well, thanks. Well, first of all, I'm not trying. I don't want to appear to be patronizing. I mean this. I'm a pastor first and foremost. Okay, that's why I tell people I don't set dates. I'm not a sensationalist. I'm not. I have to feel like I have to say that because I just want people to know I'm not coming before the cameras of the world trying to be sensational. I'm a pastor. I tell people, I tell Christians, don't go on through life blindly.
Yes.
And misinformed or ill-informed. Don't go on through life blindly.
Yes.
And misinformed or ill-informed. Don't go on through life blindly.
Yes.
And misinformed or ill-informed. Don't go on through life blindly
Yes.
and misinformed or ill-informed. It's not to see how important, powerful, or rich we can get. It's to see how much we can advance the kingdom of God while we're doing the rest of this stuff. That's my brief message. I just want people to know that that's why thank you for having me on these shows. I mean, my goodness, I'm so honored. And you've given me another opportunity before an even wider audience to say these things as a pastor, because I'm just, I am afraid that so much of the church in America is missing these kinds of truths. So anyway, that's what I would say. Thank you for letting me say that.
No, of course. We have to be watchmen. That's what we're called to do at the end times, is be watchmen. And,
Yes.
And while we do have to pay bills and take care of the family,
Yes.
we have to remember that we're here with purpose.
We are not to be ignorant of these
That's right.
Yes.
Nobody mows my grass. I mow my own grass. And you can come by anytime, see me on my lawnmower out front. Yeah, that's right. You have to do it with purpose. We have to keep our eyes on Jesus, is what I tell people. And then I use the words of Mordecai to Esther. In the book of Esther, I use these words all the time. Look, we've been raised up for such a time as this. This is our time. This is our little 70 or 80 years. We're living in the most prophetic times since the first coming of Jesus Christ. We've already proven that and talked about that in past shows. So here we are. So what do? We advance the kingdom. We open doors. We open eyes. We pull back the curtain. We show people what's really happening in the deeper state of everything. Well, why do we do that? Because that's why God has raised us up. He's trusting us with this. So here we are. So what do? We advance the kingdom. We open doors. We open eyes. We pull back the curtain. We show people what's really happening in the deeper state of everything. Well, why do we do that? Because that's why God has raised us up. He's trusting us with this. I'm blown away by that. Who am I that God would use me?
Amen.
Who are y'all that God would choose you?
Yeah, we're all here for a reason, even though we don't realize it.
That's
We're here.
right.
We're
the
born at this
Esthers.
time because God put us here at this time because we have a purpose.
Yeah.
Even if we don't right now
A
recognize it.
mandate.
We're the Esthers of our day.
Oh,
You know?
how beautiful, Pastor Gallups.
Thank
it was
you.
wonderful
Thank
having
you.
you
Oh, it's
here.
my honor. Thank you.
We were very blessed by your talks with us, teaching us, sharing with us. We hope that you've been blessed by this program.